We all have a switch that our crazy lifestyle turns off, and that, if activated, would greatly improve your health in days. Well, it's not a switch in the strict sense, it's a nerve. Today, you will discover 7 ways to quickly activate your vagus nerve. But of course, first you will need to know what the vagus nerve is, what it means to activate it, and why this is important. Well, the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body, specifically the 10th cranial nerve out of a total of 12 cranial nerves. What exactly does it do? Well, it operates in a bidirectional communication dynamic between the brain and the internal organs, and regulates the balance between autonomous systems such as heart rate, digestion, erection, or sweating, to name a few. It can perform so many different actions because its efferent branches reach practically all the internal organs, your heart, your lungs, the spleen, and the entire digestive system. It plays a particularly relevant role in the latter, as its branches come into direct contact with the digestive mucosa. This affects processes like absorption or intestinal motility. And you've heard of the autonomic nervous system, which is divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, right? Well, the vagus is the main effector arm of your parasympathetic nervous system, which coordinates the relaxation and recovery response. Its activity influences the neuroendocrine and immune systems through pathways dependent on a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, pathways we call cholinergic. You're starting to get an idea of its great importance. The vagus nerve is the connecting link between your nervous, endocrine, and immune systems, and therefore modulates neuroendocrine and immune responses. In summary, it is a master conductor that influences cognitive functions, emotional states, enteroendocrine, and immune responses. Increasing the activity of this nerve offers several scientifically backed benefits. Let's examine some of them. Then we will move on to describe up to 7 ways to activate it, many of which have immediate effects. Cardioprotective capacity. The activation of the vagus nerve can protect your heart in 3 different ways. First, it modulates cardiac dynamics, inflammatory activity, and exerts a lytic sympathetic effect, minimizing the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which when excessively activated compromises the cardiovascular system. Indeed, appropriate activity of the vagus protects your heart, but be careful, as excessive activation can have the opposite effect and alter the heart's nerve conduction capacity. Vagus nerve stimulation improves stress and anxiety management by regulating the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal. It has shown positive effects in treating resistant depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. In short, what it does is improve your resilience to stress. It also reduces inflammation. It's anti-inflammatory. Through the previously mentioned cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, the vagus nerve reduces the production of inflammatory cytokines like tumor necrosis factor alpha. Therefore, its usefulness in chronic inflammatory conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease is being studied. And it also regulates the gut-brain axis. In fact, it is the main responsible for the bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain. It modulates motility, sensitivity, and gastrointestinal inflammation. Finally, it boosts cognitive function. Transcutaneous stimulation of the vagus nerve, which I will talk about later, can improve cerebral perfusion and parasympathetic modulation of the cardiovascular system, which can be beneficial in cognitive aging and in the prevention of cognitive decline. Now let's look at 7 ways to activate the vagus nerve and regain your health. The first is cryotherapy. Whole-body cryotherapy activates skin receptors that sense the abrupt temperature change that just occurred, and this triggers an autonomic response that includes an increase in vagal tone. At this point, the heart rate decreases and the variability of the heart rate increases considerably. Another concept you have to understand is the dive reflex. When you submerge your face in cold water, a physiological response is activated that includes bradycardia, peripheral vasoconstriction, and central vasodilation. This happens in an attempt to preserve oxygen and direct blood flow to the brain and heart, vital organs, since you have submerged in water. This response arises from a powerful but very short activation of the vagus nerve. So, whenever you put your face in cold water, you're activating your vagus nerve. However, remember that cryotherapy must be well planned and supervised, as it is not a risk-free strategy. Slow nasal breathing. If we all knew how to use our breathing correctly when it's most needed, we would have better health. The simplest and available 24/7 way to activate your vagal tone is by slowing down your breathing cycle, which is called slow nasal breathing. It's nothing more than performing slow inhalations and exhalations for 3 or 4 minutes. It's really simple. You can start by doing 10 breathing cycles per minute, which is very easy to achieve, 1 cycle every 6 seconds, and progress to doing 5, 4, or 3 cycles per minute. Try to make the exhalation, releasing the air, even slower than the inhalation, and try to completely fill and empty the lungs of air. This immediately increases your vagal tone, counteracting the fight or flight response of the sympathetic nervous system, which will reduce your anxiety. Moderate intensity aerobic training. Physical exercise, depending on the intensity, can have opposite effects on the vagus nerve. Very intense exercise, like a 200-meter sprint or a CrossFit class, really nullifies its activity as it vigorously activates the opposite arm, the sympathetic. However, low or moderate intensity aerobic exercise, what we now know well as Zone 2, has a vagotonic effect that is rarely discussed. Vagotonic means that it can increase the activation of the vagus nerve and even have a recuperative effect. In fact, it is one of the best ways to activate the vagus nerve while generating a myriad of benefits. But remember that we are talking about low intensities, around 60 to 70% maximum of your maximum heart rate. Also about aerobic activities like running, cycling, swimming, skating, or rowing. Vagal maneuvers. What are vagal maneuvers? It's interesting if you've heard of it. They are techniques used to activate the vagus nerve to improve various health outcomes in medicine. One of the most used in medicine is the carotid sinus massage, something that is done in some tachycardias, like paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. The carotid sinus at the bifurcation of the common carotid artery in the neck is a baroreceptor. It detects changes in blood pressure and transmits that information to the brain through the glossopharyngeal nerve. Another vagal maneuver is the Valsalva maneuver, which consists of exhaling forcefully against a closed airway, like when we are lifting something very heavy or pooping. This increases intrathoracic pressure and vagal tone. Other vagal maneuvers include cold water immersion, forceful coughing, or administering drugs like adenosine. 5. Practice mindfulness. We have talked at length about the practice of mindfulness. In fact, we have an almost 2-hour episode on the podcast dedicated solely to it. Paying attention to the present moment without judging our thoughts and feelings has profound physiological effects. One of them is the lesser activation of the amygdala, related to fear and anxiety, or the activation of the prefrontal cortex that regulates emotions and the stress response. But it also has another detail, and it is usually done in conjunction with conscious breathing, which you already know is another way to increase the vagal tone. 6. Adequate sports recovery. Activating the vagus nerve improves rest, and rest also enhances vagus nerve activation. By rest, I don't just mean sleeping 7 hours, 8 hours at night. I mean respecting the days of sports rest. The number one cause of autonomic imbalance in the sports field is overtraining, very common, which along with other stressors such as inadequate nutrition and spending too much time at high intensities, leads us to a sympathetic hyperactivation that is sometimes difficult to get out of. So remember that rest days are part of the training because they are. Monitor your training loads and also the intensity. Use naps when you need them and prioritize your night rest over the digital leisure that we like so much. Let's conclude with the final protocol for vagus nerve activation: non-invasive devices for vagus nerve neurostimulation. Until recently, to electrically activate the vagus nerve in medicine, complex invasive subcutaneous implants had to be placed that were in direct contact with the nerve. Fortunately, in recent years, non-invasive devices have appeared on the market that stimulate the vagus nerve through the skin in areas such as, for example, the ear. In conclusion, vagus nerve stimulation through habits and devices is a little-known tool to improve your health, especially if you already start from a situation of imbalance in your autonomic nervous system. You now have 7 powerful and accessible tools to boost your vagus nerve activity. Start with the most suitable one for you. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for subscribing to the channel and thank you for your support. See you next time. Big hug and keep empowering.